The desert wind whipped sand against Abigail Vance's cracked lips as she slumped against the weathered post of the abandoned stagecoach station. 3 days without proper food had left her hollow-eyed and desperate, her once fine traveling dress now tattered and caked with the red dust of Arizona Territory. The year was 1878, and Abigail, 23, alone, and robbed of everything she owned, had never imagined she would find herself contemplating begging from strangers. The setting sun painted the vast landscape in hues of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the barren ground. Abigail's stomach cramped painfully, a harsh reminder of her predicament. The stagecoach that had abandoned her after the robbery was long gone, and the next one wasn't due for days. The small settlement nearby offered little hope. She'd already been turned away from its few establishments. Her story of being a respectable Boston woman fallen on hard times met with skepticism and cold stares. A plume of dust on the horizon caught her attention. Someone was approaching on horseback. Abigail straightened her posture as much as her weakened state would allow, attempting to smooth her tangled auburn hair. Pride had kept her from outright begging thus far, but pride wouldn't fill her empty stomach. Sam Lawson spotted the figure at the old station from a quarter-mile out. Unusual to see anyone at this forsaken spot, especially as dusk approached. The closer he rode, the clearer it became that it was a woman, and one in distress, by the looks of her. Samuel adjusted his well-worn Stetson and slowed his chestnut mare to a gentle walk as he approached. "Evening, madam," he called out, keeping a respectful distance. His voice, though roughened by years under the western sun, carried a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance. The woman before him looked ready to collapse, her green eyes sunken with hunger, yet still burning with a determination that caught his attention immediately. "Good evening, sir," Abigail replied, her Boston accent immediately marking her as an outsider. She attempted to stand taller, clinging to the last shreds of her dignity. Samuel dismounted with the fluid ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. At 32, he'd seen his share of hardship on the frontier, but something about this woman's quiet desperation touched him more deeply than he expected. "You look like you've had a rough go of it," he observed, leading his horse closer. "Name's Samuel Lawson. Most folks just call me Sam." He paused, noting how she swayed slightly where she stood. "When's the last time you had something to eat, madam?" Abigail swallowed hard. The kindness in the stranger's voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "Abigail Vance," she managed. I'm afraid it's been some time." Sam nodded, asking no further questions. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "I've got salt pork, hardtack, and some beans I cooked this morning." He glanced at the abandoned station. "Let's get you inside before the light's gone completely." The interior of the station was dusty but offered shelter from the wind. Sam efficiently gathered what scraps of wood he could find and soon had a small fire going in the old stone hearth. Abigail watched his movements, transfixed by the simple competence with which he worked. "I don't normally. That is to say." She struggled to find words that wouldn't sound like begging outright. "No need to explain, Miss Vance," Sam said, arranging his modest provisions on a flat stone near the fire. "Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive." He handed her a tin cup filled with water from his canteen. "Drink slowly now." Abigail's hands trembled as she accepted the cup. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a careful sip. The water was the sweetest thing she'd tasted in days. As Sam prepared a simple meal, Abigail gradually told him about the stagecoach robbery, how the other passengers had pooled their remaining resources but left her behind at this way station when it became clear they couldn't all make it to the next proper town. "They said the stage would return in a week," she explained, carefully nibbling on the hardtack Sam had softened in a pan with a bit of bacon grease. "But I fear I would not have lasted that long." Sam listened without judgment, occasionally adding more food to her plate when she finished what he'd given her. "You're heading somewhere in particular?" he asked. "My cousin in Tucson," Abigail replied. "She's offered me a position in her millinery shop. After my father's death and the discovery of his debts, there was nothing left for me in Boston." Sam nodded thoughtfully, pouring her another cup of coffee from the small pot he'd brewed. "Tucson's still a good 80 miles from here. Not a journey to make without provisions or protection." As they ate, Sam shared stories of his 10 years in the territory, tales of cattle drives, and the small ranch he was building near the San Pedro River. His deep voice filled the dusty station with vivid descriptions of desert sunrises and the satisfaction of watching his small herd grow. Abigail found herself smiling for the first time in days. There was something about this cowboy's unpretentious kindness that warmed more than just her empty stomach. When he described his horse's stubborn refusal to cross a particular stream, mimicking the animal's indignant snort, Abigail surprised herself with a genuine laugh. The sound seemed to please Sam immensely. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners, and he grinned widely. "There now," he said softly. "Things are never as dark as they seem on an empty stomach." They talked late into the night, the initial awkwardness of strangers melting away like the stars that disappeared with the approaching dawn. When Abigail finally dozed off, wrapped in Sam's spare blanket, he kept watch by the dying fire, contemplating the twist of fate that had led him to this abandoned station on this particular evening. Morning arrived with a clarity unique to the desert. Abigail awoke feeling stronger than she had in days, though embarrassment colored her cheeks when she realized Sam had seen her at her most vulnerable. "I've been thinking," Sam said as he handed her a cup of fresh coffee. "I'm heading south myself. My ranch is about 20 miles east of the road to Tucson. I could see you safely to your cousins, if you'd permit the company." Abigail hesitated. She'd been raised with strict rules about propriety, but those rules seemed to belong to another world now. This was the frontier, where survival often depended on trusting strangers. "I would be most grateful, Mr. Lawson," she finally said, "though I have no way to repay your kindness." Sam shook his head. "Out here, we don't keep ledgers of debts and payments, Miss Vance. The journey will be easier with conversation, and I've enjoyed yours." They set out as the morning heat began to build. Sam had Abigail ride his mare while he walked alongside, leading the horse by the reins. Despite her protests that she could walk, he insisted. "Rosie here is used to carrying heavier loads than you," he said with a smile. "And you'll need your strength for the journey ahead." As they traveled, the vast landscape seemed less threatening to Abigail with Sam beside her. He pointed out landmarks and taught her to recognize the signs of water in the arid terrain. By midday, when they stopped in the shade of a rocky outcropping, Abigail was beginning to see the beauty in this harsh land. "It's so different from Boston," she remarked, accepting the jerky Sam offered. "There, everything is crowded together, buildings, people, even the trees and the common. Here, there's such space between everything." "Some find that emptiness troubling," Sam said, settling beside her. "But I've always thought there's a sort of honesty in it. Nothing hidden, everything laid bare under the sun." Abigail studied him as he gazed out at the horizon. His face was weathered from years outdoors, lines etched around his eyes from squinting into the sun. Yet there was a gentleness to his features, a quiet thoughtfulness that belied the rough exterior. "How did you come to be in Arizona territory, Mr. Lawson?" she asked. "Sam," he corrected with a smile. "And that's a long tale, best saved for tonight's camp. We should keep moving while the day is young." They continued their journey, making steady progress south. As promised, that evening Sam told Abigail how he'd come west after the war between the states, seeking a place where a man could build something of his own. "I was just 19 when I mustered out," he explained as they sat beside another small fire. "Saw too much death to want to go back home to Tennessee. Drove cattle for years before I saved enough to stake my claim." "And you've been alone all this time?" Abigail asked, then immediately regretted the forwardness of her question. Sam didn't seem to mind. "Had a partner for a while. Josh Peters. Good man. We worked the place together for 3 years before consumption took him." A shadow passed over his face. "Been on my own since then. Hired hands during branding and roundup, but otherwise just me and the cattle." Abigail sensed the loneliness behind his words. "It must be difficult." "It has its moments," Sam acknowledged. "But there's a satisfaction in building something with your own hands, in watching things grow." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What about you, Miss Vance? What brought you all the way from Boston?" Abigail sighed, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the sand. "My father was a merchant. Textiles, primarily. After Mother died, he changed. Started taking risks, making poor investments. When the fever took him last winter, I discovered he'd left nothing but debts. She looked up at Sam. My cousin Caroline is the only family I have left. When she offered me a position in her shop, it seemed the only option. Takes courage to travel so far alone, Sam observed. Perhaps, Abigail said with a small smile. Or desperation. Sam shook his head. I've known desperate folks. They don't hold themselves with the dignity you do, even when half-starved. His direct gaze made her flush with unexpected pleasure. That night, as she drifted toward sleep, Abigail found herself wondering what it might be like to stay in this wild country, to build something alongside a man like Samuel Lawson. The next 3 days settled into a rhythm. They rose with the sun, traveled during the cooler morning hours, rested during the worst of the midday heat, then continued until dusk. Sam proved to be not only capable but considerate, always ensuring Abigail's comfort before his own. He taught her to identify edible plants, to estimate distances in the vast open spaces, and to read the changing sky. For her part, Abigail shed more of her eastern reserve with each passing day. She insisted on helping with camp tasks, learned to build a fire properly, and even attempted to make biscuits in Sam's small cast-iron skillet, an effort that produced rock-hard lumps that made them both laugh until their sides ached. I promise I have other skills, she gasped between fits of laughter as Sam dramatically tested a biscuit against a nearby stone. In Boston, I was considered quite accomplished. I don't doubt it, Sam replied, his eyes warm with amusement. But out here, we value different accomplishments. Like how quickly you've adapted to this journey. On the 4th day, they encountered another traveler, a wizened prospector named Old Pete, who shared their campfire and regaled them with improbable tales of gold strikes and narrow escapes from Apache warriors. You two make a fine pair, the old man observed as he accepted a cup of coffee from Abigail. Reminds me of me and my Martha, God rest her soul. 42 years we had together before the consumption took her. Abigail felt her cheeks warm at the assumption but didn't correct him. Beside her, Sam merely smiled and steered the conversation towards safer topics. After Old Pete continued on his way the next morning, a subtle shift had occurred between them. Sam's hand lingered when he helped Abigail mount Rosie. Their conversations flowed even more easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that neither felt compelled to fill. That evening, as they made camp near a small spring, Sam seemed unusually thoughtful. After they'd eaten, he disappeared briefly and returned with something cupped in his palm. Found these growing by the spring, he said, opening his hand to reveal a cluster of tiny white flowers. Not much compared to Boston gardens, I expect, but I thought you might like them. Abigail took the delicate blooms, deeply touched by the simple gesture. They're beautiful, she said softly. Thank you. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Sam reached out slowly and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, his fingers just barely brushing her cheek. The touch sent a warmth through Abigail that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. Abigail, he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. I know we've known each other less than a week, but a sudden noise from the darkness interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Well now, ain't this touching, came a harsh voice from the shadows. A man stepped into the circle of firelight, leveling a revolver at them. He was followed by 2 others, equally armed and with expressions that made Abigail's blood run cold. Sorry to intrude on such a tender moment. Sam moved slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Abigail. Evening, gentlemen, he said calmly. Something we can help you with? The apparent leader, a tall man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his mouth, grinned unpleasantly. Just looking for some company and whatever valuables you might be carrying. The lady's jewelry would be a fine start. I'm afraid you've made a poor choice, Sam replied. We've got little of value, and what we have, we need. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. I'll be the judge of that. Jenkins, search their gear. The shortest of the 3 bandits moved toward their packs. Abigail felt fear rising in her throat, but Sam remained steadfast beside her. The lady's not wearing that dress for comfort, the leader continued, his gaze moving to Abigail in a way that made her skin crawl. Must have some trinkets hidden away. She has nothing, Sam said, his voice taking on an edge. And you'd be wise to move along. The scarred man laughed. Or what, cowboy? You're outnumbered and outgunned. He gestured with his revolver. Now, Step aside and let's have a proper look at your traveling companion." What happened next occurred so quickly that Abigail could barely follow it. Sam's hand moved in a blur, drawing the pistol she hadn't even realized was hidden beneath his coat. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. The leader staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, while the man called Jenkins dropped their pack, howling and gripping his bloodied hand. The third bandit fired wildly, the bullet kicking up dust near Sam's feet. Sam's return shot was more precise, catching the man in the thigh and dropping him to the ground. "Like I said," Sam told the wounded leader, his voice deadly calm, "you made a poor choice. Now, I suggest you and your friends gather yourselves and ride out before I reconsider my restraint." The scarred man glared with murderous intent, but the calculation in his eyes showed he recognized the skill he was facing. "This ain't over," he spat, backing away. "For your sake, it should be," Sam replied evenly. "I won't aim for limbs next time." The bandits retreated into the darkness, their curses and threats fading with distance. Only when the sound of their horses galloping away confirmed their departure did Sam lower his weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked Abigail, concern replacing the steel in his voice. She shook her head, still processing what had happened. You shot them." "Only enough to discourage them," Sam replied, checking the area to ensure the danger had truly passed. "I don't take lives unless there's no alternative." Abigail stared at him, seeing yet another dimension to this man who had already shown her so many facets of himself. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "War teaches hard lessons," he said simply, "and the years after weren't always peaceful." He began efficiently breaking camp. "We should move. They might think better of retreating once they've tended their wounds." They traveled by moonlight for several hours before Sam deemed it safe to rest. By then, Abigail's fear had subsided, replaced by a profound gratitude and something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. As they settled in their new camp, far from the site of the confrontation, Sam finally returned to what he'd been about to say before the interruption. "Abigail," he began again, his voice soft in the darkness. "I know Tucson is waiting, and your cousin's offer is what brought you west. But I find myself wishing you had reason to stay closer by." Abigail's heart quickened. "What reason might that be, Sam?" He moved closer, his features silver in the moonlight. "I've been alone a long time. Didn't think much about it until these past days. Being with you." He paused, searching for words. "It's shown me what I've been missing. I know it's sudden, and you barely know me, but this time, it was Abigail who interrupted, placing her fingers gently against his lips. "I know enough," she whispered. "I know you're a good man, Samuel Lawson. Kind when there's no benefit to kindness. Brave when faced with danger. Gentle despite the strength in your hands." Sam took her hand from his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. The tender gesture made Abigail's breath catch. "I'm not asking you to change your plans," he said. "Only to consider that there might be a place for you here, if you wanted it. My ranch isn't much yet, but it could be a home." "A home," Abigail repeated softly. The word held such weight after months of uncertainty. "I should still go to Tucson," she said finally. "I promised Caroline, and she's expecting me. But perhaps it needn't be a permanent arrangement." Hope kindled in Sam's eyes. "I could call on you there," he suggested. "Do things properly." Abigail smiled at the thought of this rugged cowboy presenting himself formally in her cousin's parlor. "I would like that very much." Sam's kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning, a beginning rather than a demand. Abigail responded with a certainty that surprised them both, her arms winding around his neck as she leaned into his embrace. When they finally parted, breathless, Sam pressed his forehead to hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "Certainly not at an abandoned stagecoach station." Abigail laughed softly. "Nor did I expect that being abandoned and desperate would lead to this." She touched his face wonderingly. "Perhaps it was Providence." "I'm inclined to agree," Sam replied, brushing his lips against hers once more. They reached the outskirts of Tucson 3 days later, their journey marked by deepening affection and countless conversations about possibilities. Caroline Vance's millinery shop stood on a respectable side street, its window displaying fashionable bonnets that looked strangely out of place after days in the wilderness. "This is where I leave you for now," Sam said as they stood outside. He'd purchased Abigail a new dress in the last town they'd passed through, insisting she shouldn't meet her cousin looking travel-worn. "Not for long," Abigail replied firmly. She reached up to straighten his neckerchief, a domestic gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "You'll call on Sunday?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised. His eyes held such warmth that Abigail almost reconsidered their careful plan. Caroline Vance proved to be a plump, cheerful woman of 35 who welcomed her cousin with genuine affection. Her surprise at seeing Abigail accompanied by a sun-bronzed cowboy quickly gave way to knowing glances when she observed the way they looked at each other. "So that's why you're a week late," she remarked after Sam had taken his leave with a tip of his hat. "I was beginning to worry." "It's not what you're thinking," Abigail began, then stopped. "Or perhaps it is, partly. He saved me, Caroline, in more ways than one." Over cups of real tea, a luxury Abigail had sorely missed, she related the events of her journey, from the stagecoach robbery to Sam's timely appearance and their growing attachment. Caroline listened with increasing interest. "And he has a ranch? With actual cattle?" "It's modest, from how he describes it," Abigail replied. "But growing." Her cousin nodded approvingly. "Better than most prospects in Tucson, I'd wager. Half the men here are drifters or dreamers with empty pockets." She patted Abigail's hand. "But don't rush, dear. Work in the shop, get to know your cowboy properly. If it's meant to be, it will happen in due course." Abigail took her cousin's advice, though her heart was already more decided than her words had revealed. She applied herself to learning the millinery business, discovering she had a talent for design that delighted Caroline and attracted customers. True to his word, Sam appeared on Sunday, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt, looking slightly uncomfortable in the confines of Caroline's formal parlor. He brought a small gift for each woman, a silver hair comb for Abigail and a jar of honey for Caroline, both purchased with funds he could ill afford to spend, as Abigail later learned. That first visit established a pattern. Sam would ride into Tucson every other Sunday, staying at the modest hotel near the livery stable. He would call on Abigail properly, sometimes escorting her and Caroline to church, other times taking Abigail for carefully chaperoned walks through the growing town. Between visits, Abigail received letters carried by travelers heading north. Sam's handwriting was surprisingly elegant, his thoughts expressed with a clarity and depth that reinforced her growing certainty about him. "He writes like an educated man," Caroline observed after Abigail shared parts of one particularly thoughtful letter. "He is educated," Abigail replied. "His father was a schoolteacher in Tennessee." Sam had nearly completed his studies when the war began. As summer yielded to fall, Sam's visits became the center around which Abigail's weeks revolved. Each time they parted, the goodbye grew more difficult. After 3 months of courtship, during a walk along the banks of the Santa Cruz River, Sam stopped beneath a cottonwood tree and turned to face her. "Abigail," he said, taking her hands in his. "I've tried to be patient, to give you time to be certain." His blue eyes searched hers. "But I find myself counting the hours between seeing you, feeling half alive when we're apart." Abigail squeezed his hands. "I feel the same," she admitted. Sam's face brightened with hope. "Then perhaps it's time to speak plainly. I love you, Abigail Vance. I loved you when you laughed by that first campfire, despite being hungry and afraid. I've loved you more with each passing day." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Sam. Nothing would make me happier." He rose and gathered her in his arms, their kiss sealed with promises of a future together. When they returned to the millinery shop, their glowing faces told Caroline everything before they spoke a word. "Well, it's about time," she declared, embracing them both. "I was beginning to think you'd court forever." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Tucson's small church. Caroline closed the shop for the day and transformed Abigail with a gown she'd been secretly working on ivory silk with delicate embroidery, fashioned from materials she'd ordered from back east. "My gift to you both," she explained, brushing away Abigail's tears of gratitude. "Every bride should feel beautiful on her wedding day." Sam had his own surprise. The night before the ceremony, he presented Abigail with a slender gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it since I left Tennessee, waiting for the right woman to wear it." The ceremony was simple but deeply felt. Sam had arranged for a proper minister to perform the service, and several of his ranching neighbors rode into town to witness the occasion. Old Pete even appeared, somewhat cleaner than when they'd last seen him, bearing a nugget of gold for luck and prosperity. Afterward, the small gathering celebrated at the hotel's dining room. As Sam led Abigail in a dance, his eyes never leaving hers, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Happy Mrs. Lawson?" he murmured against her ear. The name sent a thrill through her. "Completely," she answered. "Though I confess I'm nervous about seeing your ranch. What if it needs more than I can give?" Sam's arms tightened around her. "It needs exactly what you already are: strong, adaptable, and full of life. The rest we'll figure out together." They departed for the ranch the following morning. Caroline hugged Abigail fiercely, extracting promises of regular letters and visits. "And I expect to be the first to know when there's news of little ones," she whispered, making Abigail blush. The journey took 2 days, with Sam pointing out landmarks and boundaries of his property with increasing pride as they neared their destination. When they finally crested a rise overlooking a valley with a creek cutting through it, he drew Rosie to a halt. "There it is," he said, his arm around Abigail's waist as they sat together on the horse. "The Double L." Below them stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a corral, a small barn, and several outbuildings. A herd of perhaps 50 cattle grazed in the distance. It was modest compared to the larger spreads Abigail had heard of, but the sight filled her with unexpected emotion. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "It's ours." Sam kissed her temple. "Everything I have is yours now, Abigail. I only wish it were more." "It's everything we need to start," she assured him. The cabin proved larger than it had appeared from a distance, with 2 rooms and a loft. Sam had clearly prepared for her arrival. The floors were swept clean, fresh curtains hung at the windows, and a new quilt covered the bed. A shelf held books, treasures in this remote place, and a small collection of dishes gleamed on open shelving near the fireplace. The woman from the neighboring ranch helped, Sam admitted when Abigail expressed her delight. "Mrs. Daniels. Her place is about 5 miles east. She said every new bride deserves some feminine touches." That first evening in their home, after Sam had tended the livestock and Abigail had prepared a simple meal, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant colors. "I never thought I'd find this," Sam said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. "Find what?" Abigail asked, leaning into his embrace. "Peace," he answered. "A sense of being exactly where I'm meant to be, with exactly who I'm meant to be with." Abigail turned her face up to his. "I feel it too, as if everything, even the hardships, was leading us to each other." Their life together began in earnest the next day. Abigail learned the rhythms of ranch life quickly, adapting her Eastern sensibilities to frontier realities. She discovered that while she might never match Caroline's skill with bonnets, she had a talent for vegetable gardening. By spring, a thriving plot provided fresh produce for their table. Sam marveled at her resilience. "You never complain," he observed one evening as they sat by the fire, Abigail mending one of his shirts while he cleaned his saddle tack. "Even when things go wrong." She looked up with a smile. "After nearly starving at that stagecoach station, I find I have a different perspective on difficulties. Besides," she added, her eyes twinkling, "I have you to make me laugh when things seem darkest." Their first year brought challenges. A dry spell threatened the creek that watered their cattle. A mountain lion killed 3 calves before Sam and a neighboring rancher tracked and shot it. Abigail fell ill with a fever that left Sam sleepless with worry for nearly a week. But there were countless joys as well. The first time Abigail successfully helped deliver a calf. The proud moment when Sam showed her the expanded herd, nearly doubled through careful management. The Sunday gatherings at the Daniels Ranch, where scattered families came together for socializing and occasional services led by a circuit-riding preacher. And there were private moments, tender discoveries between husband and wife, whispered dreams in the darkness, laughter shared over daily mishaps, and the deepening knowledge that what had begun as a chance encounter had grown into an enduring love. In the spring of 1880, Abigail's monthly courses failed to appear. After 3 weeks of quiet anticipation, she finally shared her suspicion with Sam as they sat on their porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the distant mountains. "Sam," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I believe I'm with child." His head turned so quickly she feared he might hurt himself. "Truly?" he asked, his expression a mixture of hope and wonder. Abigail nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat abdomen. "I can't be certain yet, but all the signs are there." Sam's whoop of joy startled the chickens pecking in the yard. He lifted Abigail from her chair and twirled her around, his face alight with happiness. "A baby," he marveled when he finally set her down. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Sam expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for them and another for the child. Abigail sewed tiny garments from fabric ordered from Tucson. Mrs. Daniels shared wisdom from her own 5 pregnancies, becoming an invaluable friend and advisor. Caroline visited in the summer, marveling at the transformation of both the ranch and her cousin. "Marriage agrees with you," she declared, patting Abigail's growing belly. "Both of you look more content than any city folk I know." As Abigail's time grew near, Sam became increasingly attentive, often finding excuses to check on her throughout the day. "I'm not made of glass," she teased as he insisted on carrying a bucket of water she could have managed herself. "Humor me," he replied with a kiss. "I've never been a father before." Their daughter arrived on a crisp November morning, after a labor that left Sam more exhausted than Abigail, who bore the pain with characteristic determination. Mrs. Daniels served as midwife, her calm competence a balm to Sam's frantic concern. "She's perfect," Abigail whispered as she cradled the tiny bundle with wisps of dark hair. "Look what we made, Sam." Sam's hands trembled as he touched his daughter's cheek. "She's beautiful," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Like her mother." They named her Elizabeth Caroline Lawson, though she quickly became Ellie in daily use. She was a good-natured baby who thrived despite the frontier conditions, growing sturdy and strong like the land itself. Life settled into new patterns around the child. Sam built a cradle that could be moved from room to room, ensuring Ellie was always near one of them. Abigail mastered the art of accomplishing chores with a baby tied to her chest in a sling Mrs. Daniels showed her how to fashion. In the evenings, Sam would take his turn, walking the floor with his daughter when she was fussy, singing old Tennessee ballads in his deep voice until she settled. As Ellie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered as well. Sam acquired more land when a neighboring spreads was abandoned, allowing him to increase the herd substantially. Abigail's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, providing preserves that helped see them through the winters. They added a milk cow, more chickens, and eventually a proper wagon with a team of sturdy mules. On the 3rd anniversary of their wedding, Sam presented Abigail with a gift that brought tears to her eyes: a small, upright piano, transported at considerable expense from Tucson. "I remembered you mentioning that you played," he explained as she ran her fingers reverently over the keys. "Thought Ellie should grow up with music in her home." Abigail's ability had grown rusty from disuse, but the joy of playing again quickly renewed her skill. Soon, evenings in the Lawson home often concluded with music: Abigail at the piano, Sam's baritone joining her soprano, and Ellie clapping her small hands in delight. When Ellie was 2.5, Abigail discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved more difficult than the first, with bouts of weakness that forced her to rely on Sam and occasional help from Mrs. Daniels more than she liked. "You must rest," Sam insisted when he found her attempting to hang laundry despite her pallor. "The ranch won't fall apart if you take time to care for yourself and the baby." "I'm not used to being idle," Abigail protested. "It's not idleness to preserve your health," he countered, gently leading her to a chair on the porch. "Let me worry about the work for now." Their son, James Samuel Lawson, arrived a month early, triggering a frantic ride to fetch Mrs. Daniels in the middle of a spring downpour. The birth was difficult, leaving Abigail weakened and the baby tiny but determined, struggling for his first breaths. For 3 days, Sam barely left their side, dividing his attention between his exhausted wife and the fragile infant who seemed to hover between this world and the next. He prayed as he had never prayed before, bargaining with God for the lives of those he loved most. On the 4th day, James took a stronger breath, then another. His cries, though still weak, gained strength. Abigail's fever broke, and color returned to her cheeks. Mrs. Daniels, who had stayed throughout the crisis, nodded in satisfaction. They'll make it now, she declared. Both of them have too much stubbornness to do otherwise. Life gradually returned to normal, though Sam insisted on hiring a young woman from town to help with household tasks until Abigail regained her full strength. James, called Jamie by everyone except his sister, who pronounced it Yammy, grew into a sturdy boy despite his precarious beginning. By the time Jamie was walking, the Double L had grown into one of the more prosperous medium-sized spreads in the region. Sam employed 2 full-time hands and additional help during roundup. Abigail managed the household with quiet efficiency, finding time to teach Ellie her letters and numbers between other duties. In the spring of 1885, they received an unexpected letter. Caroline was marrying a widower she'd met through the church, a man with 3 children who needed a mother as much as Caroline needed a family to love. "She wants us to come to the wedding," Abigail told Sam as they sat at the kitchen table, the children already asleep. In June, Sam considered this. It would be a long journey with the little ones, but I think we could manage it. He reached across the table to take her hand. "And it's time you saw more than just this ranch and an occasional trip to town." The journey to Tucson proved both challenging and exhilarating. Ellie, now nearly 5, asked endless questions about everything they saw. Jamie, at 2, alternated between wide-eyed fascination and cranky exhaustion. But the family's arrival in the growing city filled Abigail with a curious blend of nostalgia and satisfaction. "It seems both familiar and strange," she remarked as they drove their wagon through streets that had expanded considerably since her last visit. "Do you miss it?" Sam asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Abigail shook her head decisively. "Not for a moment. It's nice to visit, but our home is the ranch." Caroline's wedding was a joyful occasion, made more so by her obvious happiness with her new ready-made family. The children ages 8, 6, and 4 had already formed a bond with their soon-to-be stepmother that spoke well of their future together. "You were my inspiration," Caroline confided to Abigail the night before the ceremony. "Seeing how happy you were with Sam, how you embraced a life so different from what you'd known. It made me realize I could do the same." The Lawsons spent a week in Tucson, allowing Abigail to show her children some of the town's amenities that the ranch lacked. Ellie was particularly enchanted by the formal garden at the home of a wealthy mine owner, where roses bloomed in profusion despite the desert climate. "Can we grow roses at home, Mama?" she asked, her small face serious beneath her bonnet. "We can certainly try," Abigail promised, mentally cataloging what she would need to adapt such delicate plants to their more rugged environment. Their return journey felt like a homecoming in the truest sense. As the familiar outlines of the Double L came into view, Abigail felt her heart swell with gratitude. This place, once so foreign to her Eastern sensibilities, had become the center of her world. "Welcome home," Sam said softly, noting her expression as they crested the final rise. "It's good to be back," she replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand while keeping a firm grip on Jamie with her other arm. "Though I must admit, the hotel bathtub was a luxury I wouldn't mind having here." Sam laughed. "I'll see what can be arranged. A rancher's wife deserves her comforts." The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows. Abigail's rose garden, established with cuttings from Tucson, flourished under her careful tending, becoming famous throughout the region. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Sam to add modern improvements to their home, including, true to his word, a proper bathtub. The children grew. Ellie showed a talent for horsemanship that made her father burst with pride, while Jamie revealed himself to be a thoughtful child with a gift for observation that Abigail recognized from her own father's better qualities. In 1887, they welcomed another daughter, Grace, completing their family. Unlike her siblings, Grace was a quiet baby who grew into a dreamy child, often found talking to animals or creating elaborate stories with the cloth dolls Abigail sewed for her. There were losses, too. Mrs. Daniels succumbed to pneumonia one harsh winter, leaving a void in their lives that could never quite be filled. Old Pete passed through one last time, visibly failing but still spinning tales, before disappearing into the mountains, never to return. And yet, through all life's changes, the foundation remained the love that had begun when a desperate young woman with empty pockets and a hollow stomach had found kindness from a stranger who asked nothing in return. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful meeting, Sam arranged a surprise. While the children stayed with neighbors, he took Abigail on a journey back to the abandoned stagecoach station where they had first met. The building was even more dilapidated now, its roof partially collapsed and its walls leaning precariously. But Sam had prepared a special meal, similar to the simple fare he'd shared with her that first night, though considerably expanded to reflect their improved circumstances. "It seems impossible that it's been 10 years, Abigail said as they sat together on a blanket spread beneath the stars. "So much has changed." "Some things haven't," Sam replied, his arm around her shoulders. "I still think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, especially when you laugh." Abigail leaned into his embrace. "And I still think you're the kindest man I've ever known." She turned to face him fully. "Do you ever regret it? Taking in a half-starved stranger who could offer you nothing in return?" Sam's answer was a kiss that held a decade of shared experiences, hardships overcome, joys multiplied by being shared, a life built together brick by brick, day by day. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips. "Though I do have one regret." "What's that?" Abigail asked, pulling back slightly to search his face. "That I didn't find you sooner," he replied. "Think of all the extra time we could have had." Abigail laughed, the sound as clear and joyful as it had been the first time he'd heard it beside a campfire in the wilderness. "We have now," she reminded him, "and all the years ahead." "A lifetime won't be enough," Sam said, drawing her close again. "But it's a good start." Under the vast Arizona sky, with the past and future stretching out around them like the endless desert, Abigail Lawson knew with absolute certainty that hunger had led her not to desperation, but to destiny, to a love as enduring as the land that had witnessed its beginning.